Hello, I am back for round 2. I really enjoyed filming the first video, and I really enjoyed making it and uploading it. It just felt really nostalgic and it felt really good. So, I'm making another one. So, I wanted to talk about some of the books that I read in 2023. I know that people have been uploading these videos like before the end of the new year, obviously, but it is past that point, but that's okay. I still want to talk about the books that I read, so I will, because I want to. I'm going to talk about the 5 best and the 5 worst books that I read last year. I read 40 books in total, not including any of the books that I DNF'd or anything like that. 40 books, which is more than I usually read in a year. I remember in 2022, I set a goal for 35 books and I didn't reach the goal. And last year for 2023, I did not set a goal and I read 40. So I don't know what that says about me, but I'm not going to set any reading goals for 2024. So it seems to work better for me. Like tricking my brain somehow. Anyways, I have a list here of the best and the worst books that I read last year. So I'm gonna go through those with you. Also, I do just want to say almost all of the books that I read last year were digital, which is also very out of character for me because I used to swear by my physical books. I was like, I want the physical books. I love the feeling of reading a book. I love the experience of reading a book. And then once I started traveling, the convenience of having infinite free books on Libby on my phone was just like amazing. Libby is miraculous. If you don't know what it is, it's an ebook app that allows you to connect to your local library, and they provide ebooks through there, so you can like borrow ebooks for free. So I've been reading literally almost all of my books on Libby. I love Libby, my bestie, my queen. We love her. Highly recommend if you have not tried Libby, because you need to. Support your local library. Okay, so I have the 5 best and the 5 worst. I'm gonna start with the 5 worst so that we end on a high note. Now, when I say worst, all of the books that I read this year were not terrible. Okay, so that's just my disclaimer. When I say worst, I don't mean like worst. It's just it's my least favorite books out of the 40 that I read. So they weren't horrible. My lowest rating was 2 stars, which is not like the worst rating that you can give, obviously. So anyway, the 5th book on my list, 5th worst book that I read in 2023 is Outline by Rachel Cusk. Now, I didn't hate this book, and I want to read other books by this author, but for some reason this book took me so long to get through. This is actually probably the only physical book that I had the whole year. I bought this in an English bookstore when we were in France because I recognized it from Bookstagram or Book Talk or one of those, and it was on my list, so I was like, I'm gonna try it. And I think honestly I just read it at the wrong time. I don't think my head was in the right space to read this. It's definitely a slow-paced literary book, and I think that just was not the pace that I needed. So it literally took me so many months to finish reading this, but I did finish reading it. The writing is beautiful and it was really great, but it took so long to get through. So it's not the worst. It's the least worst of the worst that I have. So yeah, I'm gonna read more Rachel Cusk at some point. Just that one was not good timing. Okay, the fourth worst book that I read is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Okay, I started reading the ACOTAR series last year, and at this point I've read almost all of them except for Silver Flames, which is the last one in the series so far. And I actually like the series. Like, it's so addicting and entertaining. I like it. And I'll talk about that a little bit more but in a second. But the first book was just kind of insufferable. Like, I hated Tamlin. I hated Feyre, honestly. I hated the characters in the first book, and it was just like watching a heterosexual train wreck. It was it was a lot. But I had heard that the first book was kind of a low point, so I was like, okay, I was at least entertained. I'll give the second one a try. The second one, totally different book. Honestly, it feels like a different series. The first book feels like a prequel to the second book, and the second book feels like the actual first book. And to a certain degree, it kind of feels like the author was like, you know what, Tamlin actually does suck. I am gonna get rid of him for the second book. Spoilers, maybe. But anyway, most people have read ACOTAR by this point. So yeah, there's a different love interest in the second book, and yeah, that's all I'll say. But I kind of feel like she was just like, yeah, this guy sucks, and just like scrambled to rearrange the plot. So you kind of have to suspend disbelief a little bit to be like, wow, she suddenly, all these horrible things came out about this love interest from the first book, and now all of a sudden I hate him, which I kind of hated him before, but not, I think I wasn't supposed to hate him, but I did hate him, but then you were supposed to hate him. Anyway, so that's my fourth worst book. The third worst book that I read in 2023 was The Maid by Nita Prose. Again, this book was not a bad book, don't get me wrong. I just thought it was kind of boring. I felt like it was kind of bland. I read a few books last year that had like main characters that were implicitly autistic, and in this book I just felt like the characterization of the main character was a little bit like childish almost. It felt like a weird representation of like an autistic person, and it almost felt like, I don't know, I can't explain it. It just felt weird and off. And the writing felt a little bit childish, and I don't know, something about it just didn't sit right with me. But and I also just kind of found it boring. So not much to say about that. The second worst book that I read, I actually DNF'd this one, so I didn't even technically finish this one. I don't know if that means that it should be disqualified from my list, but it is Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. I really thought that I would like this book. Especially last year, there was this whole trend on Book Talk and Bookstagram of like the unhinged woman books, and there was a little bit of discourse about like, is that fair to say unhinged women and blah blah blah. But this book was like solidly within that category of unhinged woman books. And yeah, I just could not get through it. I barely got into it, and I was like, I literally cannot force myself to read this, because I just, and I understand that it's a memoir, but I just felt like the narrator was it read like so insufferably, and I just like, I cannot relate in any capacity. I could not relate to her at all in the first part of the book. I was just like, this is not for me. This book is not for me. And I felt like reading that book, I felt like I was back in high school, like feeling weird for not being like the normal girls that like acted like normal high school girls. I don't know. This book made me feel weird about myself. So I couldn't do it. DNF'd. Now for the most worstest book that I read in 2023 was another book from this unhinged woman category, My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa moshfegh. Yeah, I did finish this one, but I did not enjoy it. I gave this one 2 stars. This was the only 2-star book that I read. Yeah, I just felt like I could not relate to the character pretty much at all, and I found her to be really annoying. I couldn't empathize with her at all. I am kind of sick of reading books of like rich people being depressed. Like we get it. Like, I don't know. I just could. A lot of people really loved this book, but I just could not relate. Did not like it. So those are my 5 worst books. Now for the 5 best books, which I would say is more fun to talk about. So the 5th best book that I read is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This is the first Leigh Bardugo book that I have read. I did start reading Six of Crows a couple of years back, but I did not finish it. I think that the fantasy thing was just not my thing at the time, so I didn't finish it. But yeah, I went into this. I didn't realize that Leigh Bardugo wrote contemporary fantasy. For some reason, I just assumed that everything that she wrote was like the fantasy, like Six of Crows, like very like totally other, different world, and like a whole world building thing. And no, Ninth House is set at Yale, and it's about the secret societies at Yale, and the main character can see ghosts, and she's like part of a team that monitors the, I guess, ethical, magical like practices in the Yale secret societies. I don't know, I was very intrigued by the synopsis or the plot, so I read it. It was definitely a little slower than I would have liked, but I really enjoyed the book. I really enjoyed the writing. I thought it was written so well, and yeah, I'm excited to read the sequel. I think I'm saving the sequel for when I'm back in that like slow-paced mindset, because I think I'm not quite there yet, but I'm excited to read it when I do read it. Okay, so the fourth best book was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I read all of the Sayaka Murata translations that there are in English, and I really want them to translate more of her books because I loved her writing. Convenience Store Woman was my favorite out of the 3 that I read. Again, I was talking about like main characters who are implicitly autistic, and this one I loved. I loved the main character, and I thought that it was so like heartwarming, and it felt so relatable to me versus all the other ones that I talked about in my worst books. I think this book really was like, I feel you queen. I don't know, I just really enjoyed this book and this author's writing, and I am excited to read more of her work in the future. Third is the Poppy War trilogy. I'm counting that as one book, by R.F. Kuang. I really enjoyed Babel. I read Yellowface as well last year, but the Poppy War was just, I loved it. I missed fantasy, and this was like, I was like, this is why I need to read more fantasy, because this is so good. Her world building was amazing. Her characterization was amazing. I loved the way that she wrote an anti-hero, and I cried many times reading those books. If you are willing to tackle long books, I would highly recommend. I'm not even, again, like I said, I don't typically enjoy reading fantasy because a lot of it is so like complex, and I just feel like kind of exhausted thinking about all of the like trying to wrap my head around all the world building and all the magic system and the names, and usually they're all just like other, like another language, like a you know, an elf language or something. Like it's always something kind of complicated, but I encourage you to read the Poppy War. Coming from someone who doesn't read a lot of fantasy, I really enjoyed it, so highly recommend. Number 2 was Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. I hope I'm saying her name right. This book, it is a memoir. What I didn't realize going into it was that Michelle Zauner is Japanese Breakfast, who is an indie rock artist. So I didn't know that going into it, but I loved, the writing was amazing. This book was so beautifully written, so heartfelt and raw and authentic, and just like, it was so good. Her descriptions of food were just like amazing. And I also really loved the bits about music that she put in it, and how she kind of wrote her first album about her mom. And I listened to that album after I read the memoir, and it was just like a really special experience having that insight into her experience behind making the album. I don't know, I just, that, it was so good. The hype is so true. Please read it if you haven't read it, because it's amazing. Okay, my number 1 best book that I read in 2023 was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I hope I'm saying her name right. This one might be controversial. This one might be a little controversial. But I was like very intimidated by this book, because there's so much like controversy about this book, and a lot of people just talking about how like horrifically dark and triggering it is. And I can understand, if you have a certain background, why it would be triggering, and it's definitely very dark. It's definitely it tackles a lot of really heavy subject matter. But for me personally, it was not so dark that I couldn't read it. I typically read dark stuff anyways. I read about mental illness. I have mental illness, so it wasn't so dark that it made me like sick to read. And maybe I don't know. That's just what I'm used to reading and watching movies about and everything. So it was definitely dark. It was definitely emotional. It's very heavy. So if you're not prepared for heavy emotional topics, I wouldn't recommend. However, I thought that a lot of people say that the portrayal of like suicide and suicidal ideation and self-harm is very romanticized in this book. And I would challenge that idea personally. I didn't feel like it was romanticized at all. I felt like it was very, I don't know, it just felt very laid bare kind of like the horror of it. And I think that understandably people are kind of like repulsed by like looking at it, if that makes sense, and like seeing it in detail. Now I don't know a lot of details. I've heard that the author has said some questionable things about her motivations in making the book so dark. So I understand people's criticisms of saying that she just like trauma like stuffed the book just for shock value. So that's a little bit concerning, but in reading the book I didn't get that from the writing itself. I really loved the characters. The friendships in that book were really great to read about, and I don't know, I just really loved it felt really human and tender almost. I don't know, and you don't get that a lot in books, so I really enjoyed it, and I would reread it. I'd reread it at some point. So food for thought if you have A Little Life on your list, and you're like scared to read it. I was scared to read it, but you just kind of have to like go into it with the knowledge that it has heavy subject matter in it. Pretty much every trigger warning that there could possibly be is in this book, but it's, in my opinion, it's handled with like truth, and it's very real. So yeah, I don't know. So those are my 5 worst and 5 best books that I read in 2023. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you agree or disagree with me on any of these, or if you have suggestions for books that I should read in 2024, please let me know, because I am always up for finding new books to add to my Libby holds requests, so let me know. Yeah, I will see you in another video soon, I suppose. I'm going to go to bed now because I'm filming late at night while everyone's in bed so that I can have quiet to film. But I'm gonna go to bed.